Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving right into something that is absolutely fundamental to the human experience, and that is how we connect with one another. Whether we're on the job, at home with our families, or just out and about in our communities, communication is the bridge between us. So today, we're going to take a warm, curious, and really empowering look at the biology of hearing, a wonderfully diverse spectrum of communication choices, and the rich, vibrant world of deaf culture.
Just a quick heads up before we really get going. Everything we're talking about in this explainer is strictly general information, okay? It is not medical advice. When it comes to your own personal health or making healthcare choices for your family, always consult with a professional, like a doctor or an audiologist. Our goal here today is simply to empower you with some great knowledge.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at how hearing works. Second, the communication options. Third, celebrating deaf culture. Fourth, we'll talk about Martha's Vineyard and ASL. And finally, careers and next steps.
Okay, Section 1, how hearing works, the biological connection. The human ear is literally a masterpiece of natural engineering, and honestly, understanding how it works really helps us grasp everything else we're going to cover.
You know, at its most basic level, sound is really just vibration traveling through the air. It's pretty amazing when you think about it. Let's look at the actual journey that vibration takes to become what we hear. So step 1. Your outer ear catches those sound waves and funnels them right down to the eardrum, making it vibrate. Step 2. That vibration hits the middle ear, where 3 tiny bones, which, fun fact, are actually the smallest bones in your entire body, amplify that movement. Step 3. The vibration travels into the inner ear, specifically into this fluid-filled spiral called the cochlea. This spiral is lined with thousands of microscopic hair cells that literally ride the fluid waves. And finally, step 4, those hair cells convert the mechanical vibration into electrical impulses, shooting them straight up the auditory nerve to the brain. And boom, that is when you experience sound.
Moving right along to Section 2, the communication options, an equally valid spectrum.
So when that biological pathway we just talked about works a little differently, we rely on different communication options. And the absolutely crucial thing to remember here is that there's no better or worse way to connect. We are talking about a totally valid spectrum of choices, and the right mix is deeply personal. Autonomy, the right for an individual to choose exactly how they communicate, is at the heart of all this. Take hearing aids, for example. These are devices that simply amplify sound, making it louder. They come in all sorts of styles, from behind the ear to invisible in the canal. And there's been a massive shift in accessibility recently. Since October 2022, adults with perceived mild to moderate hearing loss can actually buy over-the-counter hearing aids without a prescription. That is a huge deal for affordability. Now, for more severe loss or for anyone under 18, a prescription device fitted by a professional audiologist is still the way to go. And treating hearing loss is super important because if left unaddressed, it can actually lead to social isolation and even cognitive decline as we get older.
Now, for folks with severe to profound hearing loss, just making things louder with amplification isn't always enough, and that brings us to the cochlear implant. Basically, a cochlear implant is a surgically placed medical device, but instead of just amplifying sound, it actually bypasses those damaged hair cells in the cochlea we talked about earlier, and it stimulates the auditory nerve directly. It's important to keep in mind, though, that it doesn't just magically restore normal hearing, but it does provide a really useful representation of sound that can make speech understandable.
So, the topic of cochlear implants, especially when we're talking about young children, sparks a very real and very sensitive cultural conversation. On one side, many in the deaf community view deafness not as a medical problem that needs to be cured, but as a rich, beautiful cultural identity that deserves to be preserved. There's a real fear that implants might pull kids away from sign language in their community. On the flip side, many parents and medical professionals view implants as a crucial way to give a child access to spoken language and the broader hearing world, so they often advocate for early surgical intervention. What's absolutely vital to understand here is that both of these perspectives come from a place of deep care and love. And today, we're actually seeing this wonderful growing trend called the unified path, or the both-and approach. Basically, a lot of families are choosing to use a cochlear implant for that access to sound, while simultaneously teaching their child sign language. It gives the child this incredible bilingual and bicultural upbringing.
Another tool folks might use is lip reading, sometimes called speech reading. But get this, only about 30% of spoken English is actually visible on the lips. 30%. Think about sounds like P, B, and M. They look exactly identical when someone speaks them. Because of that, lip reading requires a massive amount of cognitive effort,
constant guessing, and relying heavily on context. So while it is a highly valuable supplementary skill, it's pretty rarely a complete solution all on its own.
Which brings us to sign language. And I really want to be incredibly clear about this. American Sign Language, or ASL, is absolutely not just English on the hands. No, it is a fully complete, vibrant, natural language with its own unique grammar, syntax, and rules. Yes, it uses hand shapes, but it also heavily relies on facial expressions and body movements to convey really deep, complex thoughts. It is a powerful, vital gateway to connection and community.
Section 3. Celebrating deaf culture, a vibrant human experience. You know, deafness is so often viewed by the hearing world as a tragedy or deficit, but within the deaf community itself, it is celebrated as a completely unique difference, not a disability.
Let's talk about how language actually shapes our identity. You might see the word deaf spelled with a capital D or a lowercase d, and I promise you, that is not a typo. Capital D deaf refers to a cultural and linguistic identity. It describes folks who fully embrace deaf culture, share community norms, and primarily use sign language. On the other hand, lowercase d deaf simply refers to the audiological, clinical condition of having hearing loss. It's just a tiny change in text, but it represents a massive distinction in meaning.
And because language matters so much, respectful terminology really matters. Outdated terms like hearing impaired, deaf and dumb, or mute are widely disliked. Why? Because they imply that a person is broken, deficient, or somehow less than. We definitely want to avoid those. Instead, simply use deaf or hard of hearing, depending entirely on how the individual chooses to identify. Honestly, just following the individual's lead is the ultimate sign of respect.
Deaf culture also has its own wonderfully practical etiquette and behavioral norms. Think about it. How do you get someone's attention if you can't just shout their name across the room? Well, you might gently tap their shoulder, wave in their line of sight, or even just tap the table so they can feel the vibration. And when it comes to applause, instead of clapping hands together, the deaf community waves their hands in the air. It is such a beautiful visual celebration. Also, communication tends to be very direct and blunt, which frankly saves a lot of time. You'll also notice deaf individuals often arrive early to events to grab seats with the best visual sightlines, and they tend to share highly detailed information if they're leaving early or arriving late. It's all about making sure everyone is visually kept in the loop.
All right, Section 4, Martha's Vineyard and ASL, a linguistic history. The story behind American Sign Language is so fascinating, and it has a uniquely American origin.
So, way back in the 1690s, in a little town called Chilmark on Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts, there was a recessive gene that led to a really high rate of genetic deafness. Because there were so many deaf folks in town, the entire community, hearing and deaf alike, just learned and used a local sign language. They use it in church, out fishing on boats, literally everywhere. Then, fast forward to 1817, Thomas Gallaudet and Laurent Clerc founded the American School for the Deaf. They gathered up these regional signs from places like Martha's Vineyard and blended them with French Sign Language. And that incredible blend eventually became American Sign Language. But here's the wild part. For over a century, linguists totally dismissed it as just mere gestures. It wasn't until the 1960s that a linguist named William Stokoe scientifically proved that ASL is a fully legitimate, highly complex language. That discovery sparked a massive civil rights awakening for deaf culture.
Let's bring it home with Section 5, Careers and Next Steps, the Professional Connection.
So how does all this connect to you, especially as adult learners looking to boost your professional skills and jump into the workforce? Well, understanding hearing and communication opens up some highly rewarding career paths. If you're really drawn to healthcare, science, and technology, becoming an audiologist might be right up your alley. It does require an advanced degree, and you'd be diagnosing hearing loss, fitting hearing aids, and programming those cochlear implants we talked about. But if you are more drawn to language, culture, and facilitating immediate human connection, becoming a sign language interpreter is an absolutely incredible career. Interpreters don't just translate words. They act as vital cultural bridges between deaf and hearing individuals in hospitals, courtrooms, schools, and everyday workplaces. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a thought to carry forward into your own professional journeys. We've explored the amazing biology of the ear, the absolute importance of personal autonomy when choosing how to communicate, and the proud, vibrant history of deaf culture. So, my question for you is, how will you use this understanding of autonomy, culture, and communication to build stronger, more respectful connections in your future workplace? Whether you go on to become an audiologist, an interpreter, or just an awesome colleague who knows to wave your hands in the air for applause, you have the power to help create a more inclusive world. Thank you all so much for exploring with me today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.